Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop role playing game news, game design, interview stuff podcast. I'm Shawn Merwin here with the very, very enthusiastic and hopefully well rested Teos Abadia. How's it going, Teos?
Well, I'm enthusiastic because I went to PAX, as
Yeah,
listeners know from last week, and I got D&D socks.
doesn't
So,
get
yeah,
any
life doesn't
better
get
than
better than
D&D
that.
socks.
I also got a copy of the adventure, Dragon Delves,
Ooh,
that you've never run for me. So, keep that in mind.
still, yeah.
I know, someday. And then I went by the Ghostfire Gaming booth, and I got a copy of the
Oh,
Aurora Into the Living Sands and In the Beast Wig. I mean, it was Aurora
nice,
everywhere. That was pretty sweet. I
nice.
also got, thanks to my friend GM Tim, Norse Foundry dice. They're very pretty.
Ooh,
Ooh.
very fancy.
And then I got home and I thought, that's it. I've had Christmas. We're all done. And what do I find from Evan at Nimble Co? The Nimble 5e RPG. Super cool. It's a thick box. We're going to talk
Wow.
about heavy boxes. This is a heavy box. So
Yeah.
Nimble, the fast tactical TTRPG. So yeah, like my birthday was not too long ago, so that was like perfect. I was just like, look at the gaming gods coming together.
That's great. That is, I'm glad that you had fun, and I'm glad you got all the gifts. That's sweet. I took a very short vacation, and there are some jobs where you take a vacation and you're rested, and then you come back and everything's good. And then there are some jobs where you take a 3-day vacation and all you do is get 3 more days behind on the work you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you can guess which one mine was. So,
Mm.
uh, yeah, I spent then after getting back from the vacation the whole weekend working, and now we're recording on Monday, and so I am pretty fried, but
Oh,
we'll
that's not.
see. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll
No,
see
it's
what
okay.
happens.
It's not your fault. We'll see how this goes. We'll be able to tell real quickly because we are going to jump into our listener corner this week, and the first question is sort of a redo. N via Bluesky asked the question. I've been thinking about Daggerheart. The simplicity of the system is appealing. I'm wondering how it will feel after a year of play when character options for the class are thinner than D&D. As game designers, what are your thoughts? And you said that you answered this question last week, Teos.
Yeah, with Chris, and we agreed
Yeah.
with what you're about to say. I think so. Take it away because we wanted to hear your take
Okay.
too.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I can't say that I agree that Daggerheart is all that simple. And there's two kinds of simplicity, right? There's simplicity for the players, and there's simplicity for the game master. And I don't think it's actually simple in either aspect. But there is that question of what will it feel like after a year of play? And a lot of it depends on how often you play. A lot of it depends on how many games you run as a game master, how many games you play as a player, if there's overlap. And I answered a different question previously, and the answer to that question of would you rather on a desert island play D&D, Draw Steel, or Daggerheart? And my answer was I'm going to go with D&D because I know that a year from now I'm going to be playing D&D and I can do different things with it. I
Uh-huh.
can't say that about either of these games because I haven't played it enough to know.
Yeah.
And so it's funny that this question was then next because how will you feel after a year of play? Simplicity is good at the start of a game because you can always add complexity as you go.
Mm.
And it's easier to start simple and gain complexity than it is to start with complexity and go into simplicity,
Yeah.
right? 4E sort of tried to do that with essentials,
Yeah.
and it did not go as well, I think, as they were hoping. And I liked essentials. I thought
Yeah.
essentials
Yeah.
was
Great.
was great. It just came along at the wrong time for the wrong game.
And they
Uh,
had trouble saying what it was to the audience. I think Mike Merle's had about like 5 different times that he tried to explain it, and each time was
yeah,
slightly different. And each time
right.
felt to me a little awkward, right? And I like Mike, but it was like he was
Yeah,
trying to choose words so carefully because they were also trying to say there's nothing wrong with 4E,
Yeah.
and it was too hard a message, right? They did things like print magazines saying what the article was for, which one, when they were saying it was totally compatible. So it's easy to get
Yeah.
confused. Were you going to say another thing?
I was going to say another thing.
Yeah.
And it goes to that point you just made, and it's sort of about marketing, and it's sort of about
Mm,
who's the game for.
mm,
Uh, when you make a game and market it toward players of a game that's already there, already established game, there's a benefit because it's a breath of fresh air.
mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm,
people who like to try different things will automatically love the game. And that's why you hear so many people who are longtime, say, D&D players or even just 5e players say, oh, I tried blank and it was awesome. It was so great.
mm.
And then session 2 was like, yeah, that was really cool. And session 3 was like, okay, yeah, I get this game. And session 4 is like, yeah, I'm going to go play D&D, right? And so that's when you market a game toward existing player base, that's you run that risk of either having to be too much like that
Mhm.
game in order to keep attention, or be so different from that game that you never get any buy-in
Right.
from those original players, or they just can't grok
Yeah.
what's happening.
Yeah.
And for our main segment today, we're going to talk about creating a character for Draw Steel, and this is going to come up again. So I
Yeah.
think it's
Yeah.
important to say this. Um, so in terms of the question itself, what are my thoughts? If you call Daggerheart a simple game, I think that you will be okay playing it over and over again, because while you think it's simple, it's really not.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that sort of thing is where you keep players by saying the game is simple, but there's enough complexity to let me play this class
Yeah.
and then try
Yeah.
this and then try that. And it's always a little different. Will
Yeah.
that hold up? Will that be the case? I
Yeah.
don't know.
I had two quick thoughts on this. One is I was playing Pirate Borg this weekend, and I'll try to remember to superimpose an image of the unbelievable, for those on YouTube, the unbelievable setup that Jeff Mueller put together for this like battle with like flaming buildings and on the docks and ships and everything. And we keep forgetting. I mean, no one would say that Pirate Borg is complicated, and we
Yeah.
play it roughly every other week. And yet we still forget that when you are being attacked, it's the player that rolls, and the player wants to roll high because they're rolling to evade. But it feels like you're rolling the monster's attack. So you
Mhm.
keep thinking like a low is they missed or a high is they hit,
Right.
and then you convince yourself that you've thought of, even when you get it right, you convince yourself you must have done it wrong, and so then everybody has to think about it for 5 seconds, and it couldn't be simpler, but we just keep messing it up, right? And on the flip side of this are the comments to our video where we talked about Draw Steel's, what it was like when we played, and that
Mhm.
there were a number of things that are complicated, and that maybe it's too complicated at level 1 to make it easy for new players. And I think multiple things can be true, because I think that is true,
Mhm.
full stop. While also people are saying in the comments, after a couple of sessions, we totally get it and we're totally into it. And that speaks to what you're saying. It can be that a game feels complicated initially, and I thought Daggerheart felt complicated. But
Mhm.
after a few sessions, you get some of that groundwork under you, and it becomes just the way life is. And now it's simple, but intriguing and interesting. Then that can be great. That can be the perfect
Yeah.
mix, right?
Right. And again, I'll go back to there's simplicity for the player or complexity for the player,
Yeah.
then there's simplicity or complexity for the game
Yeah.
master. And as we have seen through the last since 1974, games run on the back of game masters. You could have 25 players who are all hyped up about something, but unless there's one person who will sit down, take the time to make a fun adventure, campaign, setting, game, whatever, those 25 people have nothing to do. So it's got to scratch the itch, but also be the salve for game masters to be able to rub on that wound that is running games and be able to feel good about it time after time after time. So thank you for hanging in and listening to that answer again. We got this interesting question from MT Black, and I wanted to discuss it with Teos. This is MT via Discord. I'm playing around with a new class for a Rules-Lite D&D clone. It's going to be a spellcaster, and I'm looking for a mechanic that feels and works in a way that is distinct to the spell systems of the cleric and magic user. Any suggestions on games I should check out? And I read this question, and I'm like, too busy, got it. And there was just this greatest discussion on our Discord channel, and it's one of the good reasons to join our Patreon is so you can access this Discord, because the discussions there are absolutely amazing, and so many people were throwing their their thoughts on what this is. But what came to me, the question I want to ask out of this for you, Teos, is Rules-Lite Spellcasting. How Rules-Lite does it need to be considered Rules-Lite? Because there's different complexity again. There's different levels that each person will reach before they say this is too complex. And there's also a level that someone will reach before they say this is complex enough to satisfy my needs. And so I just wanted to ask your opinion on, if you think Rules-Lite D&D clone, and then you think spellcasting, what is the threshold for you? Again, this is just your opinion. On what that criteria would be.
So when I think Rules-Lite D&D clone, I think of OSR type things. So it's going back towards earlier design. And that's where I think of, the wizard has a few spell slots and only a couple spells, even if the game has a lot of spells. Though that is not simple, because you have to read all those spells to decide which you come out with. Unless you have like a table of starter spells, that could be possible, right? Every spellcaster has one of these, 2 of these 6 spells, roll twice. That's a possibility to make it really simple, so you don't spend all this time looking it up as a new player. That would be new player friendly. But I think a big question with spellcasting is, do you want that giant book of spells, right? You look at the player's handbook and look how much space is devoted to spells in any of the editions, and it's a shockingly huge part of the book, right? And the melee classes don't do that to you. Why does spellcasting do it? Well, because that's what we've been doing forever, and we don't know how to not do that. If you do it otherwise, you end up actually much simpler. I think even Shadowrun had a few things that were like, mana ball and power ball, and it just, you can color it however you want, but it's kind of it's a point attack on one of your abilities, or it's an area attack on one of your abilities, and it's one of 2 abilities that you're targeting, and that's kind of a lot of the offensive power is just those 2 things. And then you have a few other things that you're doing as well, but that's the meat of it. And so every spellcaster is pretty similar because they're doing those same kind of things. That is an option that can make it simpler, right? To just say it's damage ball, it's damage ray, it's, stun ball, it's stun ray, and that's it. And that could be your way of going about it. I don't know that that's fun though, which is weird because, the warrior's just attacking by swinging a weapon. But with spells, people don't want things like that, right? I think some of the things that are obvious to this kind of question is something like what Shadow Dark did with just a few spells, and the idea that they can get wasted. You might not get it back. So it removes spell slots, and it's a chance system. But we can see how that is divisive in the player base. Some people have a great time, and some people have a bad time. And a lot of it is whether in a given game, you completely blow all your spells and they never go off, or do they go off endlessly because you just got really lucky? That can be a huge factor. I think some of the other systems that are really interesting, I thought that it's not simple, but the Scion that Mike Merles drew up for Unearthed Arcana a million years ago with point buy, and some of other systems that are like that can be really interesting too. as a
Mhm.
and you can make it simpler where you're spending some points for a thing and it feels simple because it's a small menu. I don't know.
Mhm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know what to think. That's why I rarely play a spellcaster
Huh.
um, because I don't want to think.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm interested in systems that let me play a spellcaster without having to think,
Mm-hmm.
but still making it feel like a spellcaster. And I didn't read the entire thread, but somebody was talking about like these with keywords that do a certain thing and you can put them together. And I only
Mm-hmm.
read
Yeah.
that for like 3 seconds, and then I stepped back and I was like, how cool would it be where, like you were saying, you got maybe either a certain number of points or you could combine two words.
Mm-hmm.
So you could have, like, if you wanted to just do damage, you could do fire, fire,
Right.
right?
Uh-huh.
And that would do 2d4
Yeah.
fire. Or if you wanted to fire, but also move someone, you could do like fire push.
Or fire plus
And so
area.
you, right, right, or yeah,
Yeah.
right, or
Right.
something, or yeah,
Yeah,
or
damage
boom,
plus
or so
area. Yeah.
so a fire boom, right? A
Uh-huh.
boom is an area, but you could
I love it.
also do
Yeah.
corrosive boom. You could do acid boom,
Yeah.
or you could do acid push, or right,
Yeah.
and you keep it simple like that, so you let the magic user feel like they're manipulating the
Yeah.
elements and shaping them in
Yeah.
certain ways, but it's really just 8 or 9 keywords that either are a damage type or a damage area, like you talk about, or an effect, and you put them together. Um, and I don't know if that would be satisfying enough
I think it could be
for like
honestly.
a hardcore, but
Well,
yeah.
it's hard to say because we say hardcore, and then these hardcore players will, you know, cast Eldritch Blast over and over again. So, sometimes
Mhm.
hardcore is actually optimizer and it's just one thing. So,
Right.
like it depends on
It's
the
true.
type of hardcore. I think there are people who really like lots of tactical meat and lots of options on every round. And there are people who want to do the same thing every round if it's effective, and they can both be hardcore. With this kind of system, like you're talking about, I think there are a number of ways you could go about it. And one thing I go back to is fourth edition, right?
Mhm.
Fourth edition was actually fairly simple if you could get the right thing in front of a player. And so a lot of those pre-gen cards that were just like, a
Mhm.
little pre-gen like this were
Yep.
actually really simple for people to use, right? It was like, do you want to do this thing or that thing or this thing? It's like having 3 spells. Some of them you could do all the time. One you could do, once per encounter, and one you could do once per day. Fairly simple to see. It's all color coded. And when you think about how fourth edition worked, it was sort of like those kinds of things we're talking about, right? It's a format, and it's a
Mhm.
trade-off of damage based on whether it's area or single target, and whether it's
Mhm.
imposing conditions of various types, and then it has a flavor to it. And you could do that as a system as well, right? To think through, well, this is the math of the game. And so,
Mhm.
if you're going to add in a powerful condition or tactical angle to it, well, then the damage is lower, right? And so you could do,
Mhm.
like you're saying, that whole, fire plus push or whatever, right? You could bake that
Yeah.
into a system pretty well and have it be
Mhm.
pretty simple. And I think that would be pretty darn rewarding. You could even have things like when you go up level, you get, your fire is doubled, right? Or
Mhm.
your push is doubled. So the distance you can, so things are more impactful, or the saving throw to remove the condition is a
Right.
disadvantage, or whatever your mechanics are, depending on the type of game. So it could really work over time too.
Mhm. Okay, cool. Well, we will get to more questions next week because we've got a fair bit of news going on. So let's jump right into our news and commentary section, starting with an interview with John Hight, the Wizards of the Coast president. This was gamesindustry.biz, and a lot of interesting discussion was happening there. It wasn't a typical interview where it would be question and answer. They were sort of interspersing the
Mhm.
John Hight's quotes amongst the text of the more narrative uh, article. It's a lot of stuff we've heard before, right? They talk about the studio approach to D&D and why it works so well in certain situations. And there was a lot of crossover between video game
Or
talk,
you mean the franchise
magic.
approach, right?
I'm sorry. Yeah, for the franchise approach.
They do talk about studios, which makes it confusing
Yeah,
because they have studios for video games. But yeah, the
yeah,
franchise approach. Yep.
yeah. The franchise approach where everything in D&D sits under
Mm-hmm.
one executive, and everyone is supposedly working together. Um, Now, they were talking about video games, they were talking about Magic, and they were talking about D&D. And it's very interesting to me how the like one discussion sort of morphed into another discussion,
Yeah.
which tells me that sometimes people are still trying to use what works for one model in the other model, and it never quite jives.
Mhm.
But I'll get there for a second.
Okay.
The first thing I thought that was interesting is they were talking about video games. Now, John Hight, of course, comes from
Yeah.
many video games in his background, including running the World of Warcraft franchise. So there was a discussion about the Wizards of the Coast internal studios for video games as well as external partners. And I sort of knew this, but when it was all laid out in front of me, Wizards of the Coast has Atomic Arcade in North Carolina, Invoke Studios in Montreal, and Skeleton Key and Archetype in Austin. Those are internal Wizards of the Coast studios.
Mm-hmm.
Externally, John Hight just welcomed a team of 15 former Cliffhanger game employees who were working on EA's canceled Black Panther game. They're going to be led by Michael DePlater, former vice president of Monolith Productions, on a new title all their own. And Giant Skull, led by Star Wars Jedi Survivor director Stig Asmussen, is working on that single player action adventure title set in the world of D&D. So all of these studios, one would imagine, are all working on video games. And it shows how all in they are on video games. There has to be an understanding there that if each of these studios is working on a different game, maybe two will actually come out.
Yeah, I think we said in a previous episode there was some data we looked up that said something like both movies and video games have the same failure rate or success rate, and the success rate is something like 1 in 5, 20%.
Yeah.
So one of these might work, right?
Yeah. And now one of them is it Exodus? Is that the game?
Yeah. In the internally created game, yeah.
That might be one that at least the role playing game's out, maybe. And so right, and it goes to this quest for that big thing, right? It goes to that quest for Baldur's Gate 3. It goes to that quest for the one thing that hopefully will turn into the multi-billion-dollar cash cow.
It also goes into discussion that's come from one of Ben Rigg's interviews, which he shared with Liz Shue. He discussed some things that Liz had shared with him as during his Gen Con talk. And while Ben makes some claims that I know are factually incorrect, and I checked with people to verify that they are, he does have some interesting things where he talks about, Liz essentially says, they bungled at one point they have this opportunity to say, I guess the team at Larian says, hey, how do we want to do this? And there's this option to have Wizards basically Hasbro have a much larger stake in the game rather than a typical licensing. And it's a question of, do we want this much stake or that much stake, which would all have meant a lot more money than they actually made. And Nathan Stewart goes back to Wizards, and Wizards goes, no, we don't want this. Just get a normal royalty agreement, which is what they did. And so what Ben was sort of saying was, this is so dumb. They could have made so much money. But what Liz Shue says is, look, if we had it internally, we probably would have messed it up. Mm-hmm. Not because we're idiots, but because we have so many different pressures, right? There's so many different things that they're trying to do that they might have said when that first preview version came out, which we might remember was quite bad. They may have just said, and we're done. Like, that's the game, move on.
Right.
Instead,
Yeah.
Larian kept working on this game and turned that that release into this enormous success by working really hard on it, right? And that's the
Yeah.
kind of thing that those intangibles you just never know, you know.
Right. And, that really is a great point in that there are so many times, and this just isn't Wizards of the Coast. This is other companies that are in a similar position where they get in their own way.
Yeah, yeah.
And if they had just taken a more hands-off approach, it may not have been exactly what they want, but it would have been exactly what they need.
Yeah.
And they often fail to see that by needing to have that control that is often more detrimental than it is helpful.
And yet in some other project, that might be external, the company turns it in and maybe you didn't do enough oversight and they turn in something that's terrible. So it's hard to know, right? And it's hard to say, oh, Wizards is dumb because, or Hasbro is dumb because.
Right.
It's a complex world, and all we do know is it's a bad failure rate when it comes to these things. And so, it'll be great if one of these is a really strong win. Maybe none of them.
Yeah. Yep. Speaking of non-wins, there was also the AI discussion, as there always is. And it continues to be clumsy and awkward the way these higher level executives are sort of forced to talk about AI. Whether they love it or hate it, they have to do lip service to different sides of the argument. And it always ends up being just a hot mess.
Yeah.
And so to John's credit, he did say, we will never use AI art, generative AI to create art for Magic or D&D. Okay, good for him. Good for you. But they never talk about it. They always talk about it vaguely enough that it's like, well, we're not going to use it there, but we're going to use it in every other aspect, right? And so then he talked about using AI, quote, to come up with ideas. And I'm like, God, please no. So a lot of this discussion about AI was, you couldn't quite tell. He would talk about it in terms of video games, obviously in terms of video games, like debugging. But then he would talk about it in terms of Magic and rules, as if you are debugging rules with AI. So when he said using AI to come up with ideas, I just rolled my eyes and put my head in my hands. And then he said, soon after that, at least soon after the article, but we want innovation. We want things that people have dreamt up, which is the opposite for me of coming up using AI to come up with ideas, because all AI is doing is taking previous ideas and reconstituting them. And then there was this quote, which just absolutely, as a writer, drove me insane. For instance, generating an audio performance so that a writer can hear their words before we go into the recording studio, I think is going to help us make those recording sessions go a lot faster and smoother. And as somebody who is constantly reading text out loud that I've written to make sure that it sounds right when people are either reading it in their own heads or reading it out loud, you don't need AI to do that. What you need is a person with eyes and a mouth to do that, hopefully while they're actually writing. And obviously they're talking about video games here.
Yeah.
But it's still this absolute catastrophe of a public discourse.
And the problem is that someone like John is charged with saying things that excite investors is the problem, right? Mm-hmm. So when you want to excite investors, you want to make it sound like you at Hasbro have some magic secret sauce that is just changing the nature of whatever your application is. Mm-hmm. When what actually we want as customers is solve my problems, right? Mm-hmm. And how you do that, like if there is a problem of, say, going into the recording studio and how long it takes to do something, I bet we can find a lot of process problems that will provide way more payoff than some AI whatever thingy and its limitations that are inherently going to be in there. And we won't have to burn energy, do any wild stuff. We can literally just have process improvements, right? You know?
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and if you want to solve problems, you can solve problems. Sometimes they might be solved through an LLM type approach, but probably not.
Mhm.
When I look at all the things that I do and I want my software to change, it's in little ways that would make big differences to how I work. And no giant magic tech is needed. I just need the corporation to care and actually run through this, right? And then it will actually improve my life substantially to sand these little bits down, right?
Mhm. And the last thing that was mentioned in the article was an MMORPG discussion about what Wizards sees as a potential, MMO style game for D&D.
Mhm.
And they mentioned Dungeons and Dragons Online,
Yeah, I had
which,
missed that they mentioned them, so I'm glad they at least mentioned one of them.
right, well, it was a throwaway, right? It was a, yeah, and we know this is out there. Now DDO came out years and years and years ahead of the Neverwinter
Yeah,
MMO, which was not mentioned in the article,
and they're
which
active
is
partners, which is yeah.
right, an active partner. Um,
Hmm.
and so it was just interesting that I don't know if that question came up and there wasn't anything to say, so it was just another let's throw out some
Yeah,
bland thoughts and some keywords to make it
maybe.
seem like that we're still interested in this, or if there's
Yeah.
actually any interest in making one.
And maybe because of his, background
Background.
in World of
Yeah.
Warcraft, but it is really weird. I mean, and when I think of Neverwinter, like there are things that are good and bad the game itself. I don't know that you could look at it and say, "Oh, we obviously will make it way more appealing by X."
Mhm.
I don't see that in there, and so it is a really weird thing to me to say, let's do this project all over again. Uh, and I might point, in fact, to their failed attempt to make a MMO for Magic: The Gathering, which
Mhm.
was transformed then into a non-MMO format because they thought the MMO wasn't going to work, and then they canceled that project entirely. Right, so two giant wastes of money. Uh, again, it's not easy. So
Yeah, no, it's not.
yeah,
And you have to do some, you have for any project, you have to do some pre-work. So you're always going to have to cancel something. You're going to have to change something. It's not that. It's how far down the road you go, and if it's a good idea to start with that you're just chasing. Uh,
yeah. Well, and I
and
just want to go back financially and say,
Mhm.
Monopoly Go is amazing, and
Mhm.
it's a giant pile of revenue in terms of
Yeah,
everything. But that is we only have one of them, and it's
yeah,
still less money per quarter than D&D produces.
right.
And all these video games with such huge expenses and such low hit rates, yes,
Mhm.
they can produce a giant pile of money, but it's completely erratic. Maybe
Yeah,
things like D&D are actually pretty darn good, is what I'd like to say at the
yeah,
end of this.
yeah, yeah. Because they mentioned Fortnite and they mentioned Minecraft and they mentioned all of these other types of
Yeah.
games as an MMO. And I fear for both the financial well-being of Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro and my own sanity if we start chasing Fortnite D&D, start chasing Minecraft D&D. Now there've been crossovers, I'm sure, in different ways with like Minecraft, but yeah, it's just interesting to keep a finger on the pulse of that sorts of things. We've also been keeping our finger on the pulse of the D&D starter set. We've been seeing previews. Oh, Teos has his copy because that latest D&D starter set called Heroes of the Borderlands is releasing in a week from when we are recording. So September 9th, though, which is tomorrow or yesterday if you're listening to this show, uh, is when it's released at game stores and digitally. Teos, you got a chance to look at the starter set, obviously, because you have a copy in your grubby little mitts there. What are you thinking?
It's awesome. And in fact, not only do I have a copy that I get to talk about by the time this airs, because our show will air on the 10th, so you'll have already possibly seen my video on the starter set that I'll release. But so not only did I get to see it, I've seen it in use by a really high number. I'd say countless, but technically I can count them, by a lot of people at PAX the weekend before last. It was amazing to see players go through this set and how happy they were playing with this set. It was really good. The play cards, which I'm holding one up for those who are watching on YouTube, and the method of putting your armor over the armor slot and your sword or other weapon, that's all a really neat way to do it. They have little tokens for things like on the fighter's second wind that you can spend, or on spell slots that are not cantrips. A nice way of breaking it all down in this sort of playmat format. You have neat things like all new art for monsters, and you have these monster cards, and on the flip side, all of the stats and a little bit of lore. The art is really, really cool. Excellent. And so it's almost like Beetle and Grimm's, where you can hold up the monster card and you got the stats on the other side. The maps are great, and the encounters are pretty darn good. Like the way that the type of experience that's being provided and how the DM is coached to provide it is pretty darn sound. So I really like it. Definitely watching the tables that ran this at PAX, they were really going very well, and player after player said, I want to buy this, right? Which is great. There's also a nice mechanic in the set where it doesn't just say like, hey, choose someone to be a dungeon master. It says, here's dungeon mastering, here's playing. Feel free to switch back and forth across scenarios who does it, which is a really good way of doing that, trying to encourage people to be the DM. That was really, really excellent.
Yeah. I didn't see the box set itself, but I saw the booklets, the text for the booklets, because I was working on Goblin Trouble for D&D Beyond. And I thought it was really well designed in terms of helping a new DM get through these encounters. I thought it did a great job for that, and to help the players, or to help the game master help the players using those cards, and the playmat is light years beyond even the best box sets that we've seen come out over the last 15 or 20 years for D&D.
I have a couple of minor quibbles with it. One is you only have 4 playmats and 4 character classes. So if you have a 5th player, they literally have nothing they can do unless they print out a character sheet. But then what's in counterbalance? It doesn't tell you what to do. You're just, and then when you reach the end of 3rd level, maybe it's in the last adventure book that I actually need to read that. But at least in the core part of the rules, it doesn't say anything about, how do you make that transition to a character sheet? What does that mean for you? That might be a little bit of an abrupt switch out. But hey, you at least got people into being a part of the D&D brand and having amazing experiences. And you provided a set that's full of a lot of things you could reuse, right? These monster cards, the maps, you could have a lot of fun with that over time, making your own adventures. So really nice set. We saw, like kids who would look at the set and go like, oh, I want to get this so I can run this for my friends, right? So really neat.
Yep. Awesome. We will continue to keep an eye on the previews that we're seeing all over YouTube and online. And then once the preview starter set is actually out on September 16th, we will see how it is. I can't wait to get my copy. Speaking of being able to go and get your copy of things, Dark Sun was talked about on the Tabletop Journeys podcast. Josh and Lee Wanika looked back on what makes Dark Sun an interesting setting. And so you can check out their show. Again, that's Tabletop Journeys. You can see what they have to say about the cool aspects of the setting and the drawbacks of what a new version would have to overcome.
Yeah, it was a nice discussion.
Awesome. We go from Dark Sun to Apocalypse World. Apocalypse World looks like that it is getting a new edition. Vincent Baker and Megwee Baker have a preview page up on Kickstarter for the upcoming new edition of Apocalypse World called Apocalypse World Burned Over. No launch date, but Apocalypse World is a ancestor of so many interesting, fun, innovative games that we look forward to one, seeing what they do, and two, the bakers being able to make some money off this thing that they, put so much love into and then gave away for free, essentially.
Yeah, incredible, incredible. I'd be curious if they continue to give it away for free. I mean, I sure be nice if there was a way they could make a little more money with how many games they
Yeah.
fuel.
Yep. Uh, so we go from the apocalypse world to the apocalypse of way, way too many RPGs. Kobold Press CEO Wolfgang Bauer talked about the future of our industry and the future of Kobold Press in the wake of all of these new role playing games coming out. Teos, take it away here. What did
Sure. He
Wolfgang have to
mentions
say?
Cosmere, Daggerheart, Drawsteel, Fantasy Age 2E, Cipher System Revised, which is currently ongoing in Kickstarter and or backer kit, and more. And he says, we've got all these great games, and he says that he thinks there has never been a time like this in RPGs. And he echoes something that Mike Merles has been saying, which is that he thinks the hobby is splitting into smaller and smaller groups and calls it a clear case of market fragmentation. Quote, the audience for RPGs grew huge with the arrival of 5e streaming and online play. Now the center cannot hold. What do you think about that, Shawn?
I think I've heard that said a billion times in the last 30 years.
Including it's never been a time like this before for RPGs, right?
Right. I mean, is it unprecedented? Yes, but everything is unprecedented in the sense that it has never happened before in the same way, at the same scale, with the same pieces all moving. Are we seeing market fragmentation? Absolutely. We are seeing people being asked to spend their hard-earned cash on different systems. Um, can the center hold? Absolutely. Until one of those Cosmere, Daggerheart, I can't really put Drawsteel in there because I don't think they're on that scale yet. But we talked about this so many times. Cosmere did unbelievably well. Why? Was it because people wanted to play this particular role-playing game? No, it's because they want to play in this particular setting. Daggerheart, was it because people wanted to play this particular RPG? No, it's because there was this absolutely incredible entertainment experience that was completely new to so many people, and they wanted to be a part of that. Can the games that these systems use become bigger? Yes. Can they become big enough to truly knock the center pillar out of this structure? I wouldn't bet on it. I wouldn't bet on it unless they turn all their money to marketing, until they turn all their resources to touching not just their fans of Brandon Sanderson's novels or fans of Critical Role's games, until they take that and turn it outward to the people that aren't involved already under those tents. The center, I think, is pretty stable.
Yeah. I mean, we just saw more than 1,000 people come through PAX playing D&D, most of them new, right? And there's no other game out there that's currently doing that, that's currently attracting people like that are at least hobby adjacent, but not inside the actual role-playing game hobby. And I agree with you. I think that all of these games have great potential, especially because, like, you look at Daggerheart and Drawsteel, they're really fun. They're really great games. Um, but making that leap beyond requires a little more. And as you and I said in a previous episode on this very subject, it doesn't have to be this. You do not need to topple D&D to have a fantastic audience dedicated to your game, have this game be an amazing success. I mean, Daggerheart and Drawsteel already are amazing successes compared to so many RPGs before them. If you want more, if you want the game to have a community and an audience and this sort of ongoing fire underneath it, you again do not need to topple D&D. You simply have to build that around your game and continue having that move forward. And that's a thing that is doable for these games. Not easy, but it's absolutely doable.
Yeah. I don't want to see this central pillar of the hobby break.
Yeah.
I want to see 3 more central pillars be built around it.
Yeah.
Because the worst thing that could happen for the industry is the center not holding.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the center doesn't hold, then we don't get new players coming into the game.
Yeah.
Or we get fewer than there possibly could be out there.
Right. Because no one's doing that work otherwise, right? They're even with Critical Role, there's so little that seems to pull the non-gamer in, you know, at least so it appears. And same thing with Cosmere, you know, I'm not hearing about a giant number of people that are saying, you know, I loved Avatar: The Last Airbender, you know, through one of its media forms, and I saw that there's an RPG and now I play RPGs. Like, you know, no one's saying that. I'm sure there's a person out there that that's their story, but it's not some, you know, you're not seeing dozens and hundreds of people saying that, or saying that about Cosmere, or saying that about Critical Role, you know, with specific to Daggerheart. Maybe you could, but until then, we really need what D&D does in the universe, as we will see very shortly, I think, when Stranger Things takes off. But one last thing on this article that I thought was really interesting, which is that Wolfgang kind of ends this article, and you know, initially he mentioned, of course, their own Tales of the Valiant, and he says we've published for 6 different RPGs across our, you know, since we've been Kobold Press, and I thought he was going to say, so now we're all in on Tales of the Valiant, but instead he says, so tell me, what games have you recently purchased and what games do you recently play, in a poll, or 2 questions in this poll. I guess determining what systems they support in the future, which is also so fascinating, right? That instead of saying, you know, and Tales of the Valiant, if everybody's splintering, apparently their answer is, so we want to know which splinters to publish for, rather than we're choosing our splinter or our area. And to me, that's very telling, right? It's exactly what we're talking about, which is this center not holding is a terrible idea, because Kobold Press can't even focus solely on their game. They must focus on other people's games. And that's why you need to have this center pillar, right?
Yep. And in our creator corner, we've got a couple things to talk about. The first thing I want to talk about is the Ethereal Expanse, Dreams of the Drowned God, on Kickstarter. The Kickstarter ends this coming Friday. So if you want to get in on this action, I am deep into writing and editing and reviewing for this. So the link is in our show notes. You can just go to Kickstarter and type in Ethereal Expanse, and you can go there and help us out and get yourself some really fun adventure compatible with 2024 5th edition rules now. I also want to point to Surviving Strangehollow on GameFound. I'm involved in this as well. We did a Kickstarter a while back. We're trying to get this project across the finish line. So if you backed it on Kickstarter, thank you so much. If you didn't get a chance to back it there, you can go to GameFound and you can help us out by checking that out there. Again, that's called Surviving Strangehollow. Another 5th edition setting, series of adventures, new monsters, new subclasses, all the goodness. You can check that out there. And what is Wondrous Environments, Teos?
You might wonder about those wondrous environments. The Welsh DM has just launched this project for Daggerheart, providing 50 plus landscapes and fantastical regions from across the plains. So if you know Daggerheart, you've got those cool environments with stat blocks and neat features. So you get those. You get also adversaries that match the environment. I got to look at a sample PDF that was sent to us. This included a boreal glacier, which was a neat example. So this is a gigantic tree that is sprouted within a fane of elemental power allowing it to melt the glacier around it with these possibly healing, empowering waters, but surrounded by, this brutal cold. And so this is a tier 2 social challenge, which can empower you or harm you depending on what features you interact with. And then we also get ideas for all tiers of play of what the encounters can be. So, for example, at Warlock at tier 3, who asks the party to aid them in reaching the tree so that it can use its healing powers to break their infernal contract. And of course, we get a list of lots of monsters that have been sent by the Warlock's patron, so various types of devils that can attack you and stymie you, try to prevent you from getting achieve this objective. The other examples in the sample were the Eternal Observatory, which may allow gazing into the cosmos, and it might gaze back at you, and the Umbral Sea, which is an area of utter darkness. So check that out on Kickstarter, Wondrous Environments.
Most excellent. Well, that was our news and commentary section. Thank you for listening.